Okay, so we're going to look at the beginning of Unit 2, and we're going to start with Mesopotamia. There are 4 cultures that we're going to look at in Mesopotamia. There's the Mesopotamian culture, which is in the ancient Near East. Then we'll look at ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, and ancient Rome, and we'll do them in subcategories. So ancient Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt will be into one, and ancient Rome and ancient Greece will be in another category. So some of the things that you need to know about the Mesopotamia culture, we're looking at the start really about 3500 BCE, and it starts with the Sumerian civilization. And this is truly the cradle of civilization. I know Greece is often referenced as the cradle of civilization, and the times kind of align at the same time, but what you need to know about the Mesopotamian cultures is they are responsible for the development of agriculture, the written word, which is called cuneiform, and you'll see it on Hammurabi's code. Mathematics, they developed the first cities, they developed the first type of government, and they also invent the wheel, which leads to several other inventions, which we'll talk a little bit about when we look at some of the images in the Mesopotamian culture. Their artwork is primarily to either honor the gods and goddesses or for government purposes. We will look at a ziggurat, which is their one piece of architecture that they use for worship. It's like the central place for worship, and it also is the central place for politics and government. Some of the repetition that you'll see in Mesopotamian artwork, which is a convection, is very simple patterns that are repeated. And the main media that you'll see used is clay, precious metals, shells, and precious gemstones. I think an important association between Mesopotamian culture and Egyptian culture is that they truly believed that their gods had a lifeline or a link directly to their gods. So they believed the rulers had this connection to the gods. So the rulers were speaking for the gods on earth. And you will see this referenced a lot in their artwork. So the first image that we're going to look at is the White Temple and its ziggurat, and this is from the city of Uruk, which is in modern day Iraq. It's Sumerian, 3500 BCE. The dates for this are 3500 BCE to about 30,000 BC. It just depends on what resource that you're looking at. The Sumerians kind of landed in between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. So you're going to see once again all of these cultures that are popping up all over the world at this point are all inhabiting around rivers. So they're in a valley, it's a fertile crescent, so they're able to plant a lot of things and sustain their lifestyle. They had to have mountains to put their temple on, and clearly this is in a plain, so they had to build a temple, which is why this sits up the way it is. So you have this concept of, if you think of Moses and Mount Sinai to receive the commandments, the Greeks with Mount Olympus, all these cultures put these things way up high to get this closer to the gods. The more elevated you are, the closer you are to the gods. So these elevated temples are consistent with the widespread religious concepts at this time. The layout for Sumerian cities reflect the central role of the gods. So this would have been like the central part of the city. The temples are extremely complex. They're like a city in a city. And we're looking at 4th millennium Europe. The population in Europe at this time was 40,000 people. And the White Temple is the most impact of the temples. And I think Saddam Hussein actually had some of the restoring done on this particular temple. And this temple, I read somewhere, was to honor the moon god Onana, which would make sense. A lot of these temples were for different gods. So if you look at this as far as formally, we have these things here that are called buttresses, which you'll see again used in churches. So if you think of the Cathedral of Notre Dame, it has flying buttresses, and the buttresses were used a lot in Romanesque churches, and then the flying buttresses were more adapted in the Gothic period. So this is a really, really old concept. It's nothing modern about it. It's basically to reinforce the walls so they don't collapse. And you'll see this really long ramps to get to the top. And I think it was, that you had this concept that you had to climb, and it was supposed to make you more mindful. By the time that you got to the top, you're like processing your thoughts before you got close to interact with God. This is a theocracy kind of government, which means that God is the true ruler, and the ruler on earth is to take directions from God. So on top of these ziggurats, there would have been a temple, and there also would have been a community hall and a court, and they would have both political events there, and it would be a place to worship as well. So here's another image. The next image that we're going to look at are the statues of votive figures, and this is from the square temple of Ishnuna, and it's from Ashmir, which is modern-day Iraq. This is also Sumerian. It's from 2700 BCE, and it's gypsum inlaid with shell and black limestone. So these guys are like funny little creatures, and they found these 11 buried in the same place. And we're looking at early dynastic Sumerian. So this is like the early Sumerian culture. I think it's important to note that these are made out of alabaster, which is a type of stone. They stand 1 to 6 feet tall. It just depends on which one we're looking at. And they are what they are for. They were stand-ins for individuals. Like in our culture, we would light a candle in a church. That would be like our stand-in. So when the person wasn't there actually worshiping, they put these statues there as if they were there. And they are individualized, but I don't think that they're supposed to be representative of anyone. Their eyes are really large, which you will see in Egyptian culture a lot too, and that's supposed to be this wide eye, aware of the presence of God. Skirts and beards symbolize wisdom. The shaved heads represent priests. The eyebrows coming together, it means beautiful. In our culture, it wouldn't mean beautiful. It would mean you need to pluck in between your eyebrows. But in their culture, that very unibrow, big unibrow meant it was a sign of beauty. And you'll see that in Egyptian art as well. You will see mascara that they use around their eyes, which is another thing that they use in Egypt as well. It's actually kind of like sunglasses. So these little guys are really interesting. And I'll stop here, and we'll move on to the next slide. So our next image is called the Standard of Ur, and it's from a rural cemetery. It was found in one of the rural tombs at Ur, and this is Sumerian as well, 2600 to 2400 BCE. It's wood inlaid with shells, lapis, and red limestone, and I'll talk about where those come from, because I think that's important to note that they had a lot of trade at this time. So the lapis would have been from Afghanistan, the red stone would have been from India, and the shell would have been from the Gulf. So obviously they had a lot of trade going on, so they were able to get these different materials from different locations to build these things. And they spent an awful lot of time making their artwork, so it was very important to them. And I want to talk about, there's two sides to the Standard of Ur. One side's called the peace side, and the other side is called the war side. And at one point, there was a historian that speculated that this may have been perhaps on a pole and would have been carried into war. So that's where the term standard comes from. People that would go into battle would carry flags on a pole, so they thought maybe at one point this would have been used for that. There's other theories that this could have been used to keep money in, or there could have been some type of musical instrument inside, because all of these types of things were found in these tombs as well, like the cups that are in this top column here. There were cups found in the tombs as well. So let's talk about how this is divided into 3 sections. This is called registers. So they're using registers to tell a narrative. This is the first time we see this concept of reading from left to right. So you're actually reading something visually, which is really very interesting, and I think that's why this piece is so important, because it's the first time we really see use of registers, and then you'll see it from now until really until you get into modern art. They really use that left to right reading to create their story. So let's talk about this bottom register first, and then we'll talk about the war side as well. So we see people bringing things to a destination. So perhaps they were bringing something to their king. And you see some animals. They're not as detailed as they are in the second register. In the second register, we have the more identifiable animals, and perhaps these people were bringing them for taxation or for sacrifice as a collection for the king. And then finally, you have the top register, which you have the king himself, who's in a chair, and he's so big and he's so important that he's busting out of the register here. And he's so much larger than anyone else. We know that he's the king. We know that he's the most important. And this is another example of the use of hierarchical scale, which you have the lower class, the middle class, and then the upper class. So truly that hierarchical scale. The servants are even smaller than the people that are enjoying the party or whatever this is going on. And even the musicians back here are smaller figures as well. So that is the peace side. And there is a nicer like flat image of the peace side. And now we're going to look at the war side, which I think I have a better, angle of it. So the war side shows really terrible violence, and if you really zoom into some of these images, it looks very cartoonish, and it almost reminds me of the Bayeux Tapestry in the way that it's laid out with these little like characters marching. But it's really violent. You see down here there's people being trampled, and they're slaying people here in the center section. So let's look at this from the bottom to the top again. So from the bottom we have people being trampled by horses, which I just stated, and you can see like the engineering of the wheels too. So they were very proud of that development. They were very proud of the fact that they developed carriages. And then it goes from a walk to a full run, and we can see this progression of movement, which is really advanced if you think about it. The second register, you have a line of soldiers readying for battle, and then you have helmets that were found in the burial site as well. So obviously this is referencing some type of importance to them, probably because the king was victorious, which we'll see at the top register. And then more towards the end, you see probably people being defeated over here, and the actual battle is in the middle. Then you have the top register, and the king is once again extremely large, larger than anyone else, and his head's breaking through the register. And the prisoners are actually naked and are being enslaved, which I think is fascinating that this concept is like started here and it carries on. You have the composite profile where the shoulders are squared with the picture plane, the head's in profile, and then the legs are in profile too, but the body, the shoulders are in like a frontal position. And that's just to describe to us what the body would really look like in all different positions. And the last image that we're going to look at in this first lecture is the Code of Hammurabi, and it's from Babylon, which is modern Iran. And we're looking at 1792, 1750. I put 1780. 1780 is like a good date, BCE. This is made out of basalt, and basalt is a pretty hard stone. This stands about 6-7 feet tall, and I really want to, let's start with the top, because the laws are on the bottom. So let's really focus in on the top here. We have 2 figures. The one on the left is actually Hammurabi, and the one on the right is a god. He is Shumash. The horns raining from his helmet tell us that he is the god Shumash. So I'm going to have to